Hello and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast and our latest episode. We're the show that explores inspiring journeys and extracts learning and wisdom from our guests to help you on your journey. My guest today is a former professional basketball player, Commonwealth medalist and brain cancer awareness campaigner. Mike Martin had an incredible playing career that took him around the world. But his biggest adventure yet came in 2020 when he was diagnosed with brain cancer. Mike speaks to me today candidly about the challenges he has faced transitioning out of full-time sport through to his diagnosis amidst a pandemic, and most recently his fundraising efforts as he hiked to the base camp of Mount Everest. It's a deep and personal interview, and I'm really grateful for Mike being as honest and as open during our interview. I hope you take a lot from it. So let's get into it and our latest episode where we are in conversation with basketball legend Mike Martin. Hello Mike and welcome to the podcast. How are you keeping today?
Not too bad. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
I was very grateful for the connection through another one of our former guests, and signposted me in direction, and I don't think I've ever had so many incredible strands rolled into one story. So I'm really looking forward to kind of, I guess, pulling on some threads. But for the uninitiated out there, do you want to give us, I guess, a bit of an overview, a bit of an introduction as to who you are and a bit about your story?
Bloody hell, I don't know where to start. Okay, Mike Martin, ex-professional basketball player, ex-England international, also Commonwealth bronze medal winner in 2006 Commonwealth Games in Australia. Currently recovering from brain cancer diagnosis and basically just trying to put my life back together.
Okay, plenty of threads to pull on there, but sport has obviously played a huge part in your life and obviously professionally in your work, which obviously we'll come on to in a bit. But take us back to the early years, because everyone has their own story of how they fell into sport. Where did it start? What was the early experiences like, and how did that shape, I guess, what came next?
Me and basketball, it was never anything that was planned. It was completely by accident where I was introduced to the sport, fell in love with the sport, and literally gave my all. My earliest memories of basketball would have been at school. The only sad thing about it is that at that particular time, basketball wasn't one of the sports that the school were attempting to, push. We had just recently been built a brand new sports hall. Now, this was toward the last year of my secondary school. So, having the opportunity to use and access the sports hall was very, very limited. So we'd only ever get an opportunity to use it in games, and not knowing anything about basketball, being a tall kid, quite athletic, everybody thought and assumed, that's going to be a natural transition for Mike, to do. That wasn't the case. My first love was football, believe it or not. But growing up in the 80s, there were a lot of boundaries that I experienced personally, which slowly began to force me to fall out of love with the sport of football. Finishing school in 1990, I found I was in a place where I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. My grades weren't that great, as embarrassing as that sounds, but that's the reality of it. So, there wasn't an opportunity to go straight on to further education based on my grades. So I was left in limbo for quite a while, not really having a direction, not knowing what I was going to be doing. So, eventually I managed to get myself enrolled in a college course where I didn't need many good qualifications or good grades. So, I toyed around in college for 3 years without actually completing a full year at college. I was one of those kids that was just very, very unorganized, very confused as to what adult life was going to look like. And as I said earlier on, given the opportunity to be introduced to a new sport, it was one of those situations of when you feel, you found something that resonates with you on more than just one level. basketball was that thing for me. And I can remember the day. It was a hot summer's day during the holidays, and a friend of mine just happened to walk past my family home, and he had a basketball in his hand, and he was like, "What are you up to today?" And I was like, "Well, I've got nothing planned. I'm just chilling, as you do." And he suggested just coming down to the local basketball court, and my first reaction was, "What for?" He's like, "Just come down, I'm just going down there to meet up with a couple of friends. Seeing as you're not doing nothing, you might as well just come down." So I decided to follow, went down, and it was one of those surreal moments where, on entering the court, seeing all the activity, guys were down there playing music, there was just a whole different community that I had never experienced before. And it was literally at that moment I said, how the hell have I been missing out on this? Now, not having any sort of skill set, I was a tall, lanky kid. I could jump a bit. Didn't have very much coordination. But regardless of those things, I still attempted to get involved. And it was just something that blew my mind. I just loved the speed of it. And obviously, there was a lot of attitude attached to it as well, which just felt normal for me. Guys were talking shit. And again, me still being very, very wet behind the ears, not really knowing how to respond, bugged me. And I guess the journey just began from there. So having left the court that day, I was just on this incredible high, having found something that kind of like really identified with me as a young, kid, inner city kid from London. And also, attempting to, compete with like-minded people who really didn't have any idea where they were going to be, in the next year or two, as far as whether it be working, um, studying. We were all kind of like in the same boat. But, I was left with this sensation of, I actually want to do this. And then I was back down there the following day. And from what I can remember, that entire summer, I couldn't be dragged off that court because I just wanted to be there all the time. And I mean, the friends I made then are still friends that I speak to now. And we often reminisce about, the things that we do just to play. Climbing over fences, jumping over fences, getting chased out by guard dogs and whatnot. But to be on the court was where we wanted to be. That's where we were at our happiest. And, there were a couple of occasions when, UK weather would interfere with your intentions of playing. We'd be out there with a basketball wrapped in a plastic bag and literally dribbling through puddles and still playing the game because that was literally all we had to look forward to. And as time went by, my skill set began to improve. Started to get quite a few comments from people, where do you play? Have you ever considered playing, for a team, blah, blah, blah. And playing for a team was something that was the furthest thing from my mind. So I'm like, safe to say I'm like 19, 20 at this point, which is obviously classed as picking up a sport really late. I was introduced to a guy called Namo Shiri, who an awful lot of basketball players in London know. And he literally forced me to go to an organised basketball run with a club called Westminster Warriors, which I had heard of. And embarrassingly, I'm happy to admit that I was actually petrified to go down there because I had heard about the coach at the time, Steve Alexander, disciplinarian. Being born and raised in a single parent household, I wasn't really used to, being told what to do by a male figure. So that was one thing that, I was quite skeptical about. And then again, they had quite a number of really good players down there that I had heard of in and around the community. So going there was one of the last things I wanted to ever do. But I ended up going down because, Nama was very, very supportive, making it clear that I've got talent and, why would you want to waste your talent basically? And because I felt so passionate about the game, I decided to go down there and then literally, you know, my vision, my expectations, I could see them all being fulfilled based on me committing myself to the program that they had in place. So that's basically my introduction to the sport. With not having any previous, opportunities to be coached, without having any previous knowledge about the sport other than knowing of or hearing about Michael Jordan at the time. I didn't have access to any sort of videotape back then. Everything was word of mouth. And it was quite a very strange period when you don't have access to, coaches and those players that were classed as good players. They were all talking about going to the States. And, mentioning America to me was like, going to America? Why the hell would I want to go to America? And at that time in particular, everybody was like, yo, if you want to make it, you need to go to college. Now, me already knowing that my grades were nowhere near good enough to even think about approaching any sort of a school in the States, that opportunity I already had said, not happening for me. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to develop here and see where it goes. Fortunate enough for me, I had a really good group of guys around me as far as players who became close friends. And I would literally, just watch them, attempt to emulate what they did on the court. So my very first year of signing with Westminster Warriors, which was back in, I want to say 96, 97, I literally played 0 games that season because I was playing behind Julius Joseph, who I'm sure you're aware of. And I'd be on that bench just watching Julius do his thing and wait for my opportunity. So the following year, Julius ended up going to the States college, which obviously meant now, okay, there's a spot available. So, I'd commit myself to working out, attempting to replicate the type of impact Julius had. And then obviously the opportunity came. And I ended up playing the entire season. And unbeknownst to myself, there are stats. And I'm like, what people actually count how many rebounds you get. People actually count how many block shots you get. Because I'm promising you, all of this stuff was just it wasn't within my realm of understanding, that you play the game and you get graded on how well you perform and blah, blah, blah. Because not ever having been involved in competitive sports, all of that stuff was not known to me. I wasn't aware of it. So as the season ends, again, Nama was like, do you know how well you done this year? And I was like, well, no, I'm just playing the game, getting yelled at from coach. And I was just out there playing as aggressively as I could because that's what I saw and thought I had to do when I got the opportunity to play. So I ranked quite highly in offensive rebounds, defensive rebounds, court efficiency on the floor, shooting percentage, etc., etc., etc. So Nama's thing was, you're actually too good for this league. And I think we were playing Division 2 at the time. He was like, you're actually too good to have to spend another year here. So again, through his guidance and his opinions, the next jump was to approach a professional basketball club. Now, if you can imagine, I'm still relatively new to this environment. My thing was, do you really think that's the wisest move to be making at this moment in time? I've only just gotten comfortable playing organize basketball with guys who are now my friends, I'm not too sure if I'm ready for that jump. But he was very, very supportive and adamant that, Mike, if you don't do this now, the opportunity is going to come and you're going to lose out. So he had a decent relationship with Vince McCauley-Raddack, who was running Milton Keynes Lions at the time. So we went up there to try out. Vince loved, what he saw, and he offered the both of us a contract for that season. And then my professional career began, which is a little bit messy, but nonetheless, each club I eventually ended up playing for, I performed, which obviously opened doors for other clubs to approach me and so on. So, from a kid not knowing what the hell he wants to do with his life, finding basketball by accident and just having the right people around me propelled me in this direction. And, not having anything else to really fall back on, that was my pathway. I made that decision. This is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to run with it for as long as I can and accomplish as much as I can while I'm blessed with the ability to do it.
And here we are.
And here we are, 20 odd years later.
Do you know, there's a couple of threads I find fascinating because I think it's not uncommon for people in their late teens, early 20s to not have a clue what they want to do. I think there's an ongoing discussion about the value of sport and sports clubs in society when it comes to monetary investment. And I think you can put statistics out all you like, but the human story of that is massive. And I guess the other thread, just more that I found curious, was, that first season with Westminster where you didn't see a game, the irony of 10 years later being on the same bench at the Commonwealth Games as the person that you waited all that time for. And I think, that I just find that curious how kind of all of those things kind of ended up. But I guess through your professional journey, obviously it is another world when you start being in the elite athlete space and the pressures, the requirements, the whole lifestyle that comes with it. And there were things that you probably went through over these years that you're going to draw upon now, on the journey that you're going through. And I think it'd be cool just pick out a couple of things through that professional journey that perhaps, again, being quite wide-eyed and quite late into the game, you perhaps didn't anticipate, but have really put you in good stead now that you reflect back.
Definitely. I mean, I'm not trying to make it come across any different. And that's how I see it. I don't see myself as any different to anyone else who decided to play the sport and attempt to, make it a career. But something that stood out for me is being coachable and being acting like a sponge, because obviously, people who are ahead of you or are more advanced than you are at any particular role, there's always something you can learn from them and use for your own progress. So, again, I revert back to growing up as a kid in the 80s in London. Didn't have a father. So discipline was something that I was only taught through my mother. I never had a male role model within the household who I could really learn from. Now, I say that, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful manner at all. I have an older brother, but my older brother wasn't born in the UK. He was born in the Caribbean. So his interpretation of London was different to mine. He's come from somewhere hot where life is a lot harder, and he's now in the UK and he's excited and happy to be here. So his journey as an adult, a young adult, was very different to mine. So he obviously left home prior to me, I guess, hitting my teens, when I would have needed a role model more so at that time, because I've now left primary school and the world's very different as a secondary school kid. You're meeting kids from other communities. and you're all coming together at in this one venue. So discipline was something that I lacked, and I can be open enough to admit that. I wasn't a very strong-minded kid, and I don't know if I'm, again, coming across difficult. My mother did everything she could to make me become the man that she wanted me to be. I was a very soft kid and quite emotional, if I'm being totally open. I missed my dad like crazy, and I'd have thoughts of him struggling, which would hurt me as a kid because I didn't know where he was. In a nutshell, I had no idea where he was. So when you're kids can be horrible without understanding the level of trauma they're causing by saying things to you. And unfortunately, I was one of those kids that would get teased, and the only way I would know how to manage that was either one, confront them, or two, just shy away and disappear. What basketball taught me was you got to earn the right to be on the floor, which meant you had to maintain a level of toughness, mental toughness, which is something that has helped me throughout my whole life. You can't back down. Again, something that I've had to instill with everything I actually do in my life. And if you're going to do something, you do it with all of your might. And you have to be willing to sacrifice certain things. And again, that's something that has kept me on this journey through my basketball career. And obviously, having mentioned about my diagnosis in 2020, those qualities, that tool bag of skills was definitely needed throughout that entire time. And I still had no choice but to use those tools to this day. So, basketball has made me the man that I am today. And without it, I dread to think where and what sort of a person I would be. I mean, the sport opened up so many doors. I had never, ever even ventured outside of London before basketball. And I remember a story, that the guide will still laugh at me about at Westminster Warriors. We had a game in Cardiff. Now, bearing in mind, I'm this kid. Even though I'm 19, I'm not very worldly, if I'm being, honest. And they said, "Yo, Mike, we're on a minibus. Mike, have you got your passport?" I go, "What? Before?" Now, we're leaving the country. We're going to play in Wales. We're on a bus. And obviously, I'm already going through the offenses and what I got to do on the offensive end and the defensive rotations. So I'm thinking about all of that when I'm on the bus, sitting at the back of the bus with the guys. So they say, "We're going to a different country. You need your passport." Now my heart's in my throat and I'm thinking, shit, I put the team in a position now where I won't be able to play. What's going to happen? So they left me to stew for like a good couple of hours before letting me know, "Listen, we're just fucking around with you, excuse my French. We're just messing with you. You don't need your passport." And I'm like, "Oh, thank God." So anyway, we go to Wales, we play, we get thanked. And I kind of like lost my train of thought a little. So as far as the mental toughness and the level of commitment and giving everything that you're passionate about, your all, are some of the things that I've had to use to get through, the ordeal of being diagnosed with brain cancer, of all cancers. And I'm very, very thankful for that because, as I just mentioned, if it wasn't for those things that I had acquired through playing basketball, I may not even be here today. So off air, we had a conversation about, how do we deal with our days? And, a lot of people tend to use the term, oh yeah, one day at a time. And for some of us, a day at a time is too big a thing to consume. So it's literally, some days are one moment at a time, however long that moment lasts. That's what I'm going to put my all into. And going through chemo was very, very challenging, where, I'm looking at the clock and I'm just like, oh, I just want this day to be over with. But I've got like 10, 12 hours left in the day. What the hell, and how am I going to get through this day, knowing that my body feels like absolute crap? I'm nauseous, got no strength, no energy. And then there's also that side of you that you don't even want to talk about anything that concerns the future. So you become this shell of a person who feels like there isn't an outlet. And through identifying that, okay, Mike, maybe let's not look at the next 10 hours, let's look at the next 20 minutes. What are you going to do to entertain yourself and keep yourself mentally in a good place? And more often than not, it would result in thinking about basketball. And I swear to you that sport just seeps into every part of my life. Feeling crap. I don't know if I'm going to survive. Okay, let's break this whole feeling down. Okay, what's going to help me focus on something else? Hey, basketball. Let me go through my shot technique. Let me think of how I'm going to set this screen and how I'm going to roll and open to receive the ball to finish the play. How am I going to close out on this guy? And before you realize, 45 minutes have gone by. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so thankful for having the opportunity to play this sport. And that was and still is my coping mechanism. I mean, I still have trouble sleeping. And, some of the thoughts is me looking at myself outside of my body, going into a pull-up jump shot, offensive rebounding. And I just relive those moments over and over and over and over and again. And before I know it, I'm waking up the next morning, having had a decent night's sleep. And what allowed me to switch off? Again, the game, the love of the game, the sport, the movement, everything that's involved. It's been a godsend, and I feel blessed and I feel fortunate to have been given the opportunity to play this game now. And I guess to people who don't understand the game to the extent that players do, will never get it. They'll never get it and understand how important being able to compete and push yourself in order to achieve a particular goal, crosses over into your everyday life activities, whether it be, raising your children. You need to have a level of determination. You have to be able to express the do's and don'ts of raising a young child. And that you have to do that with consistency. Just like you go to the free throw line, you have to be consistent with what you're doing as far as your form, balance, elbow, eyes, follow through. That level of consistency at the line transitions over into the consistency of telling your child, no, you don't do that because of X, Y, Z. You do this because this is the way you're supposed to do it, and you're going to get the desired result. So, just being an athlete, the level of discipline just helps you out in so many other areas in life that you don't really realize at the time.
So let's kind of fold that forwards, because like with any athlete, you have your professional years, and obviously I know you continue to play, well into your senior years, but there comes a point where obviously what comes next, and obviously mindful of the challenges you've had in recent years, there was that transition point that sharpened, shall we say, some of those tools and took them from the court into, a slightly different court out in the real world. So just talk us through what that looked like, I guess, with the mindfulness of what came next and the things that you really did hone in that period post-pro playing years.
I think for me, I was one of the more fortunate players because, you know, unlike Europe, when you play overseas, you get paid enough to live quite well. It's not like that in the UK. So I've always had to subsidize my salary through working, whether it be part-time or whatever the case may be. So I've always been quite fortunate in the aspect that I've always worked within the leisure industry, which is one of the things that allowed me to get on the basketball court so often. Because my early years of, you know, being employed, I would definitely say was at the current sports centre that I'm doing this interview with you from, which is Wilton Sports Centre. Now, without the access to the basketball court here, I would have been screwed. Because, you know, I started working here literally around about the same time I picked up the basketball. And starting up here as a recreation assistant, you know, I was responsible for setting up and setting down activities in the main sports hall. So I kind of like knew what the timetable was. So there'd be quite a few occasions where I'd get myself in trouble because I'd look at the timetable and figure out, okay, cool, it's shoot for half an hour here because there's nothing booked. Or I can get an hour's worth of computing in here, there's nothing booked. So I always had that freedom to access the basketball court as often as I wanted to, which was awesome, which was great. You know, you fall in love with the ball and you fall in love with being on the basketball court, which was my space and my place to switch off. So signing a professional contract with Milton Keynes Lions. And, you know, I think it's fair to highlight these things because, you know, we have a lot of young athletes, a lot of young talented athletes that, you know, I would like to say come from a similar background as mine, where you're confused, you don't really know what you want to do. So my first professional contract, I signed to Milton Keynes for £35 a week. Okay, which we look at now as pennies. And I was getting a fair bit of court time. So that outweighed, you know, what I was receiving as a financial benefit. So literally all that money went into fuel. So I was literally playing for free. So that being the case, I had to increase my hours at the sports centre, which luckily at the time I was able to do. So my interest went from being a dry side rec assistant to now wanting to become a lifeguard because they paid more. So I went for lifeguard training, you know, luckily enough I passed and now became a lifeguard. But at the same time, you know, sometimes there are days where people don't turn up for work. So my role would be lifeguard, dry side rec assistant, and I'd attempt to do the same thing. Get on the court, get some shots up, quickly run back onto poolside. So my role at Wolves Sports Centre literally progressed as my basketball career progressed. So they were hand in hand. They went together. So whatever the shortfall was playing professionally, I was still in a position to earn money through working at the leisure centre. So, you know, your ambitions start to change. Who wants to be a bloody lifeguard, you know, for their entire adult life? I wasn't one of those people. Then my interest turned to the fitness suite. So at the time, I was mentored by the gym fitness manager at the time while I was playing basketball. So he had a bit of an interest in basketball and how my career was progressing. So, you know, I'd explain to him, yeah, you know, I'm getting to play a lot, but because of the position I was playing, I was getting murdered under the basket. I'd outrun any of those bigs, you know, in the BBL, any of them. I'd outrun them. A lot more athletic than them. So because I was like 6'5" I had no choice but to play in the post because my skill set was still very limited. But, you know, playing against guys like Billy Singleton, fucking hell, you know, I'm going to get eaten up. And then he made the suggestion, have you ever thought about, working out, trying to get stronger, in order for you to manage yourself better on the floor? So then started working out, started putting on a bit of size, started feeling a hell of a lot more confident. So when I'd see these guys on the floor, I'd be like, tonight, you're going to have to work your ass off just as much as I'm going to have to work, so it became more of a physical battle on the floor. They'd still win the fight because of their skill set, their knowledge, and so on. But I just became addicted to working out because I knew the benefits would pay off eventually. And then, having been mentored by the gym manager, my interest started to change and I wanted to become a fitness instructor. So again, my role within the sports center was increasing as far as job title, responsibility, earning potential. And this was the same thing that was happening with basketball, starting to get paid a bit more money, starting to be given a lot more responsibility on the floor. I wasn't just a rebounder and a big that could, run the floor. I was now being asked to put the ball back in the basket after rebounds. So now, I'm putting points on the board, which was awesome. And then slowly, but eventually, my role at the Wilson Sports Centre, they were now advertising personal trainers. And for me, that was something that began to become a lot more appealing for me. So I eventually managed to gain my PT qualification, which I was loving doing. Being a personal trainer was like a bit of a dream come true. So, that transition for me was a little bit easier than I would say for other people who are playing the sport and committing themselves to the sport to the same extent that I was. And not through arrogance, you get accustomed to being appreciated on a Saturday evening or a Sunday evening playing in front of a crowd. So I think for me, that was one of the biggest things. One of the biggest changes is that Saturdays were no longer the highlight of my week. The commitment side of practicing 3 to 4 nights a week was now gone. What do I do with this time? So I slowly started to PT a lot more. Now, personal training in comparison to basketball, there is no comparison, and for me, I began to look at it from a standpoint of, on the floor, I have a level of responsibility to myself and my team. On the gym floor, I also have a level of responsibility to my client to make sure that I'm very observant and I'm delivering the type of session that they're paying for. So as much as I've attempted to make that form that similarity between the two roles, I wasn't able to get the same sensations of being on the basketball floor as I was in the gym. And that was really hard. I felt I was losing the ability to express myself because on the basketball court is where I express myself the most. That was me in my rawest form. And I would look forward to being that person because that's my outlet. Having that taken away, through a variety of different reasons, age, expectation, was something that hurt me a lot, if I'm being honest, towards the end of my career, especially finishing my career at London Lions, brand new organization, playing at home. But, I'm hitting 40, 41. The body's beginning to break down and expected to be on the floor for that length of time. And, being an athlete that, being an athlete whose presence was one of quite high impact, jumping and sprinting and all the rest of it, all of that catches up with you at some stage. And I was under the impression that, that would be taken into account. Unfortunately, because of the situation we were in and the club had to achieve, because brand new club, you're in, biggest city in the UK. you can't not perform. And I felt that I was being ridden a little too much and for a little too long. And this was slowly forcing me to underperform, which now created another issue for me. So, when it finally happened and I retired from playing with Lions, I was now out there in this void. Who am I now? What's next, Mike? PT was always there. So I invested and, dug my heels in and began to give the personal training thing everything I had. But again, as I've highlighted, it just wasn't the same. And I slowly began to experience, issues with my health, my mental health. Feeling like I was a failure. Seeking something else to fill that void. And as much as I worked out, as much as my body changed and transformed, and I began to look better than I ever had looked in my whole life, I still wasn't happy. I then returned to playing, and I can't. I'm sure the order it went in was after leaving Lions, I coached basketball for a year while PTing, to subsidize, my finances. I then ended up signing with, can't remember the order now. It was either Westminster Warriors or London Leopards, both franchises that I had played for in the past. So, both of them were sort of like a coming home sort of thing. And loved playing, but obviously the commitment was less. And I still felt that I still had enough energy, passion, and fuel to either have an extra practice session or to be playing more regularly. So, despite the decline in the career, I always felt I still had something left in the tank. And it's been that way. It's been that way since and up until 2020, which is where everything changes.
Well, we'll dive into that. It's just, I guess it's quite timely. One of the team that I work with in my day job won a medal at the Commonwealth, or won 2 medals at the Commonwealth Games in Australia, but a different one, 12 years on from you. And that was in Nepal. And he stepped away from swimming at Christmas this year. And we have a lot of conversations, certainly over the first 3 quarters of this year, of what does it mean to step away from something that has dominated your life since you figured out who you were, or you were in the journey of finding out who you were. Who am I now? How do I find that? How do I replicate walking out into a stadium of, for the 2018 commies, it was 15,000 people, I think the outdoor arena held. It was something ridiculous. And it was like, how do you replicate that getting up for work in the morning and going into an office? And
there is no comparison.
There isn't. And I think, and it's trying to find another way of making you tick, scratching the itch, if you like. But there's a fascinating documentary, I think, on HBO called The Weight of Gold. And it follows a lot of Olympians and other international athletes when they step away from sport and what the first year looks like. And it talks about, we all want to hear about the winning, but then what happens next when they drop over the edge. And I guess interesting that you went on that journey, transitioning out of the full-time playing career, and then obviously had life when, let's forget about basketball for a second, we've got one hell of a curveball to throw at you. And just take us through that experience of that becoming on your radar, but also that processing of it and gearing up, if you like, from your arsenal of tools that you've now spent quite a long time acquiring, not knowing that this was the battle that you were going to need them for.
I mean, the first thing that I will say about the introduction to that diagnosis, 2020 started for me with knowing I was going into hospital, had quite a big surgical procedure. So, unbeknownst to quite a lot of people, I played my whole career with a slip disc. I was always in agony as far as living with sciatica. So, that was something that I had managed my entire career through pain medication, seeing the numerous physios, osteopaths, a lot, strength and conditioning coaches. And it was identified to me, I would say, back in, I was playing, it was with Thames Valley Tigers, with Paul James, who is my coach of all coaches. You know, that man's, he instilled a level of confidence in me that just pushed me over that edge. Because that year I played for him, I got called up to represent England. And I know I'm going a little bit off topic, but those people that impact your life in that way, you have to sing their praises, man. You have to, because if you don't, who will? And I love Paul James bits. The level of confidence he instilled in me to be the player that I became, I could never ever repay him for. And that's when everything changed for me as far as being a basketball player. I played alongside a teammate called Kelvin Robertson, who is one of my closest friends who I still talk to now. Me and Kelvin used to work out together in the gym. We'd spend so much time together. And we would just bounce off of each other, especially on the floor. There's a rebound going up. It's either him or me. We're bringing that ball in and we're off to the races. Having Eric Burke as our point guard as well. And we also had Barry Bowman with us at the time and Greg Meldrum. And, we used to just run that floor like cheaters. It was just amazing. And having PJ on the side, supporting us and instilling us with confidence was like the biggest game changer of my career. So yeah, I went into I entered 2020 knowing I was going to go in for back surgery, because back when I was playing for PJ, my back was giving me so much shit that I went and saw a specialist. And he identified what the problem was, and he said, look, I'm not too sure where you are in your career, but if we perform this surgery now, you're going to have at least 2 years out. And I was looking at him like, are you nuts? Do you have any idea where I actually am in my career? Things are actually beginning to change and open up for me. So having known that, I didn't go with his suggestion. I said, I'm going to give it some thought. I just began this rigorous training schedule to strengthen my back, despite having the slip disc, and knowing that no matter how strong your back is, you've got, an issue there that is not going to be rectified by training. You actually have to have this procedure. So, knowing that sat with me for the rest of my career, knowing that at some point I'm going to have this procedure. So 2020, I had agreed to go in and to have this surgery at St. Mary's Hospital in London. So February 2020, I go down, have this surgery. I wake up pain-free. And I'm like the most relieved version of myself ever. I wake with no pain. I'm forced to start walking around the ward as soon as I'm able. So literally coming out of anesthetic, I show them that I'm able to urinate without any issues. I'm eating food and I'm keeping food down. Next thing I know, the physiotherapy department comes in. Mr. Martin, we have to get you up. And I'm looking at him like, what? I just had surgery this morning. Yeah, we have to get you up. So they eventually get me up, walk me around the ward, and I'm actually taking steps with no pain. And it's such a surreal feeling. There's no pain. I can wiggle my toes and there's no pain. There's no referring pain. So I'm ecstatic about the fact that I'm actually pain-free, which is something that I haven't experienced for years, if not years, decades. I'm pain free. So, I'm in hospital recovering and so on. And the feedback I get from the surgeon is surgery went really well. We're happy with the procedure. They show me x-rays, show me the pins and the posts that they put into my back, L3, L4. And they advised me, Mr. Martin, we understand you're an athlete, but our advice is that it's going to be highly unlikely you're going to be able to perform, let alone recover in a short period of time. Now, I'm hard-headed, I can say that about myself. I'm hard-headed. And having the experience of being a personal trainer and an ex-athlete, I have an idea what my body can achieve. And I ran with that. So literally on getting home, having waited 15 days for them to remove my stitches, I started training. I was at home. I started training. At the time, I was in a really good relationship. We were going out for regular walks, which is awesome. And so I had the surgery in February of 2020. By the time we hit April, I was back driving. February, March, I was back driving on my own, no pain medication, and I slowly started to reintroduce myself to training clients again. Now, 2020 was a hell of a year for everyone, because obviously now we have, this COVID-19 announcement. And during that whole time, because Leisure Centres has shut down because of social distancing, I now had to take my skill set outdoors. So I was training clients outdoors. And not too sure if you can remember, back then we had an amazing beginning to the summer where literally every day was hot and it was bright and it was just so good to be outdoors. So unbeknownst to me, again, my business is slowly picking up and I'm making money hand over fist. And then I start having these headaches out of the blue, having these headaches. Now, because I was spending so many hours outdoors in the sun, I put it down to dehydration. So having these headaches, taking pain medication, which at the time was helping. But then, I started to experience episodes of forgetfulness, which is not like me. I've always been somebody who's quite anal about things, to the extent like I know where I put my car keys, I know where my wallet's kept, so I literally had a routine whenever I'd leave home. And at the time, my partner was living with me because she was helping me through recovery of the back surgery. So I'm leaving home to go to work to train clients, and I start doing things that are quite abnormal for myself. So I start leaving the front door open, getting in my car, going off to work. And so my partner would call me and say, Mike, are you in the house? And I'm like, no, I'm training my first client. She's like, but I'm sure I can hear you outside the flat. And I'm like, no, I'm in the park right now. What do you mean? So she keeps me on the phone. She says, hold on, I think the front door's open. She walks out, front door's wide open. She's like, did you not remember to shut the door? I'm like, of course I shut the door. I'm adamant, shut the door. So anyway, at the end of my day, I go back home, we have a conversation about it. And then she says, you're doing a few things that are quite odd for you. I'm like, what do you mean? So she reminds me of the things I used to do, as far as, I highlighted how anal I am about certain things. I've always been quite finicky about things going back into place where they were taken out from. So even down to my remote controls, I put my remote controls down in a particular spot. She was like, you don't put the remotes where you normally put them. Okay, cool. And no biggie. And then I start forgetting a number of other things. Now, during this period, I'm still having these headaches. So because I was training so aggressively, I put two and two together and thought, okay, headaches. Could I have a trapped nerve? Could I have aggravating something in my neck or in my mid back to cause these headaches? So, you know, I embark on a stretching routine, which doesn't seem to help, doesn't seem to do anything. And then self-diagnosis comes into effect again. And then I'm like, maybe I'm experiencing migraines. Start taking migraine pills, which help, but they only help for a short period of time. Now with migraine pills, you can only take a certain amount of that pill for a certain amount of time. So now I'm exceeding the stated length of time to take this medication. So now I think I'm managing things. So on one particular occasion, I'm training a client out in the park, and from what I can remember, I'm having a conversation with her. And then the next thing I know is that she said, "Mike, are you okay?" And I'm looking at her, none the wiser. I'm like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why? What's wrong?" She said, "Mike, you stopped talking and just was looking into the distance." And I was like, "Stop messing around, Lucy." She's like, "No, Mike, this is what happened. Are you okay?" And I thought I was fine. No issue. So anyway, we end the session. I go home, speak to my partner about it. And she's like, "Look, I'm getting a bit concerned about what's going on here." So the following day, we decide to go and do some grocery shopping. And we're in Sainsbury's, local Sainsbury's supermarket. And I put the trolley down the chilled aisle. And I lose all sensation down the right-hand side of my body. It's like from my right shoulder down, it disappeared, got erased out. And I was stuck on the spot. So as my partner turns around, she said, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I can't feel my leg." Mike, stop messing around. I said, "I'm not messing around. I cannot feel my right leg." So, we're out in public. She starts getting annoyed. And because I'm in such a shock, I have no choice but to attempt to regulate. So I sit down on the floor in the supermarket. And then a member of staff comes around and he's like, "Sir, are you okay?" And I'm like, "This may sound weird, but I can't feel my right leg." And then the longer I'm sitting on the floor, the more I'm aware of people walking around me and looking at me weirdly. So, give yourself that talking to, like, what the fuck are you doing sitting on the floor? Get up. So I managed to get back on my feet. And my partner's looking at me all scared. And I say to her, "Listen, I just need a moment. I'm trying to self-regulate." And then slowly but surely, tingling sensation comes back into my foot. So we finished doing the grocery shop and we have a discussion in the car. And now I'm at a stage where I'm like, you know what? Something's wrong. I need to find out what's going on. Subsequently, my eldest son's mother had just qualified as an osteopath. So I'm like, who can I go and see? We're in the middle of COVID. I know one thing. I'm not going to any flipping hospital. I refuse to go into hospital because people are going into hospital and not coming back out. So I give her a call. I explain the symptoms. I explain what happened. She says, "Okay, Mike, not an issue. Come over. I'll look you over." So we go and visit her, sit down, start having a conversation. She gets her clipboard out, and then she asks me to explain what has been happening. So as soon as I get to the point of saying losing sensation down the right-hand side of my leg, she puts her pen down, puts the clipboard down, and says, "Mike, as much as I want to help, I'm not allowed to touch you by law." "Well, what do you mean?" "I think I've just got a trapped nerve. I just need a massage." "Mike, I can't touch you." And I see the seriousness in her face. She says, "Mike, you have to go to hospital." I'm like, "I'm not going to hospital. I'm not going. I'm adamant I'm not going." You know what it's like winning a fight with a woman. So I'm having to and ah, am I going to go hospital? Am I going to go hospital? Now, where I live, where my son lives, we have a hospital literally round the corner. Now, I lost my mum in 2006 in that hospital. I was adamant I'm not going there. Now, the other two hospitals that are at my disposal were St. Mary's, which is where I had the back surgery, or Charing Cross. I completely forgot that we had Hammersmith Hospital within our location. So we drove to Charing Cross. As I approached the entrance, I'm stopped by security. So he's like, "How can I help you?" I'm like, "Well, I've been advised to come to hospital because, I have an issue." So because security is so tight at hospitals during this period, my partner wasn't allowed to come in with me. So I get allowed in. I go and speak to, the receptionist. He sits me down. And coincidentally, at this time, the security guard goes off for his break. So my partner comes into the hospital. So we're both sitting, waiting to be seen. So doctor comes out, give him all my information, puts it up on the system, blah, blah, blah. Then he reads through the notes. And then he asked me a number of questions. And he said, "Look, not too sure if there's going to be anybody in the radiology department because everybody's gone home. It's like 8 o'clock in the evening." So I'm like, "Okay, cool." He said, "Well, I'll have a check for you." He goes around, has a look. There's 2 members of staff still there, and they're happy to do the scan. So he said, "Look, we don't know what this is, but we're in a position to give you a scan. So if you're happy to go and have a scan, let's get it done." I'm like, "Okay, cool. Let's get it done." Not for a second am I thinking I'm going to have to stay at hospital. So we go have the scan. We're asked to wait. We wait. And then one of the members of the radiology team come out and say, "Mr. Martin, we've done the scan. What we've noticed on your scan is that there's a mass." And these words haunt me. "There's a mass sitting over your right frontal lobe." Now, I'm not dumb. I'm quite educated. So maths, okay, something sitting over my right frontal lobe, which is why I've been having the headaches. So I'm sitting there looking at him, and then he says, "I'm not in a position to state whether this is malignant or mine's gone blank. Benign." Those two words, my mum passed away from cancer. Those two words have me like sitting up. And I'm like, "Cancer? Cancer?" Look at my partner, she's got tears in her eyes, and I'm like, "What the fuck's going on? What am I being told?" So, literally everything just drops out of me. And I'm sitting there attempting to understand what I'm being told. So he says, "Because of what's on the scan, we are not allowed to discharge you from hospital. We have to keep you in." And now I'm standing up and I'm like, "I'm not staying here. I'm leaving this hospital." Then my partner's like, "Mike, this is the best place for you to be. We don't know what's going on. You can't leave." She's crying. And I'm left in the position of, do I take a step forward or do I sit down? Do I take a step forward or do I sit down? And I'm going through these two options. And I feel like my body's doing this and that. Forward, step back, forward, step back. And then I just end up sitting down. And then it dawns on me, I'm going to be in this fucking hospital. Again, excuse my language. I'm going to be in this hospital tonight. So, having gone in there thinking, I'm just going to get, told there's nothing to worry about. I'm now being told that you potentially have something that's life-threatening. So this is a Wednesday evening. And I laugh about it now, but I swear to you, there was nothing to laugh about on that Wednesday evening. So they told me I'm staying in. I accept that I'm staying in. My partner has to go back to my flat, get me an overnight bag, pajamas, wash bag, all the rest of it. So as she leaves, I'm straight away taken to the ward and I'm given these steroids. So I'm taking these steroids, and my reaction to them is that I begin to start having hiccups. And I couldn't stop, uncontrollable hiccups. So my partner comes back, she hands them my belongings, I go get changed, and now I'm in bed. Obviously, she now has to go back to my flat alone, not knowing what's going on with her partner. So we FaceTime, we have a conversation, which for me felt like hours. She lets me know after I'm discharged that evening I was talking the most mumbo jumbo, starting conversations, unable to complete the conversation. She's seeing me on screen with my eyes rolling back in my head and me not acting like the Mike that she's accustomed to knowing. But at the time, she doesn't say anything because she doesn't want to make me get even more anxious. So that's Wednesday night. Wednesday night comes and goes. I don't sleep a week because I'm continuously having these hiccups. Get woken up Thursday morning. Oncology team arrives and they're like, Mr. Martin, we've had a look at your scans. Similar to what you were told last night, we have no idea whether or not this is, a benign tumor. Now they introduced the word tumor. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, taking this information in, but this information is not being absorbed. It's being said and I'm hearing it. I'm not fully understanding it. So I spend the entire Thursday in hospital having conversations with my partner. She's reassuring me, I'm reassuring her, everything's going to be fine. So Thursday night comes, fall asleep, go to bed, get woken up Friday morning. And I get woken up being told, we're going to take you down to theatre for surgery at 11 a.m. And I'm like, what? Now, I came in Wednesday, spoke to 2 people on Thursday, and now I'm being told I'm going to have surgery to my head. Now, this may come across a little bit naive. I never once for a second understood what that surgery would involve, to the extent that I convinced myself or told myself that it wouldn't be anything too dramatic as far as surgery was concerned. And it wasn't until that, I'm not too sure if I had mentioned this earlier, the nurse appeared with a silver tray and she had a number of different utensils on this silver tray. So she asked me to sit on the edge of the bed and she picked up a pair of scissors. So, I'm looking at her thinking, what the hell is she going to be doing with that? And she she took my locks and she attempted to cut my hair. And I was like, why are you cutting my hair? She said, Mr. Martin, we need to prep the area. And now I'm slowly beginning to realize they're going to have to perform surgery on my head. And I don't understand why, even to this day, why I never, I won't say accepted, why I didn't envision them having to go into my head in order to get access to this tumor. So anyway, I'm sitting on the edge of the bed. I allow her to cut the hair from the right-hand side of my head. And before I knew it, I was sitting there blubbering like a baby. I was crying because I just didn't comprehend what was going on still after being in hospital for 3 days. Nothing made sense other than I've been given a diagnosis and I'm in hospital. And that's all I was able to digest at the time. And again, it didn't help being there on my own, not having anybody physically to lean on or talk to other than the doctors who I weren't familiar with. I had my phone, I had access to my phone, but I needed some sort of physical contact, somebody to be there with me physically. But obviously that wasn't possible. So she also had these stickers that resembled polo mints on the tray. So after she had cut my hair, she began placing these on my right hand side of my head. So again, not knowing anything, I asked her, what are these for? She said, this is where they're going to place the clamp. And again, clamp. What's going on? I had 101 questions, but I wasn't in a place mentally where I could verbalize them. So I wanted to say and ask certain questions, but I was so frightened at the time that I was in a place of, okay, this is a procedure. I just have to let them do what they're going to do. And it was at that point I just pretty much just let go. And everything following her placing these stickers on my head is pretty much a blur. I guess your body goes into this place where whatever's happening outside of you, because you have no control of, I have no choice but to just succumb to it and let it be what it's going to be, let it do what it's going to do. And that's what I was forced to do on that Friday morning. I remember leaving the ward on the bed, not knowing what was going to happen. And between that moment and waking up, I remember nothing at all. I don't remember being put to sleep. The next thing I remember is waking up and my right eye completely shut because I just couldn't open it. And I felt like I had a plaster over my eye. But it wasn't until I started having a conversation with the nurse did I realize that my right hand side of my face was just completely swollen. And I was aware of feeling quite a heavy weight on the right hand side of my face. So as I'm trying to figure out what was over this side of my face, I used my hand and I touched my head, bandaged up, but there was still something pulling my face to the right. So as I gently prod and feel for what it is, I realized it's a bag. So they had a bag attached to my head to drain the swelling from my head. So later on that day, I then get told by the surgeon, surgery went really well. The plan was to perform a basic biopsy, but what they ended up doing, because of where it was situated, they were able to remove most of the tumor. Now, they explained it to me so I could understand it better, that if you imagine a fried egg, they were able to remove the yolk. Now, because the tumor had been there for such a long time, unbeknownst to myself and anyone else, if you imagine the egg white of a fried egg had attached itself to my brain. So they were unable to differentiate between the egg white of the tumor and brain tissue. So they said rather than continue investigating, they felt it would be safer for them to end the surgery then, clean me up, close the incision that they made, and suggest radiotherapy as my next step. So I think again, trying my best to think back clearly, I think I was in hospital for a further 5 days, thereabouts, showing good signs of, recovery. I was then sent home with a concoction of drugs, which I was to take for the next 15 days. So after those 15 days, I went back into hospital, had the stitches removed, and something that stuck with me was how they managed to remove the drain, the bag, while in hospital. And it felt like they were pulling my face off of my head because they had to manually remove it. And it was like the most painful thing that I've ever experienced, even more painful than getting up out of the bed the afternoon of my back surgery. It was excruciating for the entire time that they were pulling that tube out of my head, and I just felt like this is never going to end. But eventually, as the tube came out, it was like, the most excruciating pain I've ever experienced. And literally, it just stopped. As soon as that drain came out, the pain just disappeared. So as I was saying, 15 days at home, making sure that I'm taking care of the stitches, making sure it doesn't get wet. Went back in, had my stitches removed, and then literally a few days following that, I then start this radiotherapy treatment, which required me to go to hospital 5 days a week for 6.5 weeks. So Monday through Friday for 6.5 weeks. So my first radiotherapy session wasn't too taxing. They created this mask for me that I had to wear every session. And that was supposed to protect the other part of my head that they didn't want the radiotherapy to interfere with. So it was basically a mask, and while under the machine, it would target this area of my head, which is where the remaining cancerous cells were. And because of the type of radiotherapy, they explained that the rays go in one end and they have to have an exit point, which would be diagonally across from where the insertion point is. So as the weeks go by, I slowly realized that I'm losing hair over here because I still had my locks remaining, because I just was in a position where I just didn't want to cut them because I felt that after my basketball, my hair was one of the things that gave me this identity. So 3/4 of my head was still full of hair, full of my locks. But then I started noticing that as the hair was thinning here and struggling to grow back, it was literally falling out. The same thing was happening on this side of my head. And so now, I'm waking up and walking around with a bald spot here and a bald spot here. And that really started to have an impact on, my mental health, how I saw myself. So continuing with the treatment, now I'm beginning to notice weight loss, and a lot of weight loss. So I get to a stage where I was like, you know what? I've got to do something about this just to help myself mentally. So I decided to cut my hair off. So myself and my partner got the scissors, started chopping away at my locks. And again, such an emotional experience of sitting there crying, very much, unconsolable, because I'm still thinking, why is this happening to me? What have I done to deserve this? But it was a process. I couldn't stop the radiotherapy because I want to live. I still want to be here. So we complete the radiotherapy treatment, and they then let me know that the next step now is chemo. So I get given 4 weeks of recovery from radio before I can start chemo. And again, this is still a bit blurred. We decide to make the decision to move to Southend because that's where my partner lived. She was in a flat share, and coincidentally, her flatmate decided to move out, which allowed us to move into a 2-bedroom flat, which is what we did. So the day in which we decided to move was a Friday, and I was slowly beginning to get my strength back. So we packed up transit van full of my most prized possessions, which at the time was my Jordan collection. So I'd been collecting Jordans for years. We'd only wear them a couple of times and then rebox them, put them away. So we ended up loading up the transit van with one 3-seater sofa, and literally the rest of the space was taken up with boxes full of Jordans. And within each box, there was like between 6 to 8 pairs of Jordans. And we eventually set off. Now, that particular Friday, the weather was really bad. And so we set off in the evening. Once we eventually arrived in Southend, it was literally, I want to say it was approaching midnight, it was just after midnight. And we were both tired. We were both smashed. So it was one of those situations where as we're getting out the van and I'm about to open the side door to begin to unload, we sort of like simultaneously looked at each other and we were like, look, let's just do it in the morning. And we agreed on getting some rest, waking up early enough to start unloading the van so we wouldn't get a ticket because we had no choice but to park on a double yellow. So we go into the flat, settle down for the evening, go to sleep. I wake up and I'm like, okay, cool. Let's get this van unloaded. Walk to the van and I approach the side door. The van looks fine. It's in the same position I parked it in. Doesn't seem to have been tampered with. And I opened the side door. But I noticed that the leather sofa has been moved. Now, one thing that I was very, very aware of while we were driving to Southend was that we were taking corners nice and easy. You know, we weren't braking sharply in case we damage anything in the van. So having seen the position that the sofa is in, I was like, how the hell would the sofa manage to move from where we set it, or placed it rather? I also strapped it in, so there would be limited movement. Why is the sofa in that position? So while I'm questioning the movement that could have happened, I then slowly begin to notice it looks like there's a lot less boxes in the van. And then I stop breathing and it feels like my heart stopped. So I walk around to the back of the van and I open the double doors and I'm like, oh my God, my shoes. Where the fuck are my shoes? And I'm looking around and I'm looking at the van and the van hasn't been tampered with. There's no sign of a break-in. There's no sign of broken glass or anything. And I'm standing there and I'm like, are you serious? My partner then comes to the van and I'm looking at her with shock and horror on my face. And she's like, what's wrong? And the only words I can put together is, my shoes. And I'm saying this with, I'm laughing because it's still surreal to this day. I'm saying this with pain in my voice. My shoes are gone. And she's like, what do you mean? She comes around, she's like, oh my God, And I'm looking at her, she's looking at me, and we're not in a position to really exchange much. So first thing is, what do I do? Do I call the police? And again, because it's such a huge shock, things are still in somewhat of a blur. So we make a call to the police, and because it's still hazy, I can't even remember if the police attended, the scene of where the trainers were stolen from. But I do remember something being said along the lines of, we've had a number of transit van breakings in the area, and we think it's because of the gypsy park not too far from where we lived at the time. So obviously, I share this news, my partner shares this news, and then, I come to the conclusion, right, all my shoes are gone. There's literally no way in hell I'm going to be able to recoup this stuff. Very close to £10,000 worth of shoes have been stolen. That belonged to me. They were mine. Having accepted, it was a dumb thing to do, leaving them in the van overnight, despite the van being locked, despite the van literally being no more than 50 meters from where we were moving into, and yet nobody saw or heard anything. Just wound me up even more. But once I'd come to terms with the fact that my belongings have been stolen, time goes by, and then the word's been put out. So a number of people who were concerned, not only because of, what I've been going through up until that point, I started getting a bunch of messages on social media, on Facebook, on Instagram. Yo, Mike, I'm really sorry to hear what's happened. Do you know what trainers you had? So I then went about creating this list of the shoes that I had. And then following that, I'd get messages on Facebook, are these your trainers? And, there were a few moments where I was like, how am I supposed to tell if these were my trainers that were stolen? Everybody loves Jordans. I've got a size 12 foot. Amongst the basketball community, that's the average size of any basketball player. And so, I'm getting all of these messages, and it just got to a stage where I was so inundated with all these messages, and I appreciated them, but at the time, with everything that was going on, it really began to drain me, and I just wanted to put an end to it. So I'd respond as respectfully as I could at the time, and just explain, look, it's very difficult for me to let you know whether or not these could be my trainers, because it's a common size, despite some of them being really old models. I wouldn't be able to confirm that, yeah, those are my shoes. And because of the vast number of shoes I had, I was just lost as to being able to confirm, are the shoes that they're sharing with me online, are they mine? So, a friend of mine created a Thanksgiving page for me in an effort to help raise as much money as was possible in order for me to potentially purchase what's been stolen, which I was really, really thankful for. And I think at the end of the time where the last donations have been donated, I think the page raised just over £6,000, which put me in a really good position to start, replacing these shoes. But some of the pairs I had, I couldn't find anywhere, no matter how hard I searched, just was impossible to find them. Or if I found them, they'd be selling them in the thousands. So again, had to swallow that bitter pill of knowing that I would never ever be able to replace some of the shoes that, I really loved. And I guess for some people, saying that you love a pair of shoes might sound a bit weird, but, since starting to play basketball, I've been infatuated with Jordan. Literally everything about him. He was just he became a god for me. He became a role model. I wanted to play like him. I wanted to have an impact in the sport like him. Everything for me was about Jordan. Getting to arguments about him, about his greatness, about his legacy. I would argue about him like he was a family member. But, that's just a basketball player's passion. So, once I finally managed to put that whole situation to bed somewhat, I then now have to deal with the next part of this journey, which is beginning chemo. So, you read up on what this treatment can do to you. And in order for me to be in the best physical place to undergo this treatment, I had spoken to a number of people who had suggested that because of the type of cancer I was living with, that brain cancer thrives off of carbohydrates as its fuel source. So I was advised to look into a keto diet, but my keto diet was very, very strict and very, very difficult to sustain. And I was lucky enough to be in a relationship with an amazing woman who literally did everything for me in order to get through these next couple of months. So we had adopted a keto diet way before I started chemo. So during radiotherapy, I was on a keto diet, and she took on the task of doing the food preps, cooking, which in itself was a very, very demanding task. And I've always loved and appreciated her for that, because it wasn't easy having to change your whole way of eating. So my keto diet was really, really strict, as I stated. I was only allowed to consume 12 grams of carbohydrates per day, which put me in a position where I was so lethargic. I was struggling to remain awake during the day. And yeah, it was a very, very challenging time, both mentally and physically. And she just became my support system through that whole time. She was there for me. She helped keep me focused. She helped boost my morale. And it was a very, very trying time, very demanding time, very stressful time, because obviously you've got my health condition and now the added pressure of preparing these meals that you don't really know too much about. And it involved a lot of investigating, a lot of reading, a lot of research, and a lot of it she was doing on her own, because I was literally laid up in bed for days on end. So, moving on, we start chemo, and I go in for the beginning of my first cycle. And just approaching the ward, there was this smell about it that wasn't pleasant. So as I enter the ward, I'm now met with my worst nightmare, seeing people who have been on chemo, sitting in chairs, attached to these bags. And it's quite haunting to see people sitting there, a number of them with headscarves on, no eyebrows, looking really, really frail. And I'm like, oh my God, is that going to be me? And I'm left with these emotions that I wasn't able to control. But I felt I had to put on this brave face with dealing with this reality, which was going to be my reality. And it still tugs on my heartstrings now, because out of all those people in there, I don't know how many survived, because they just looked like they were literally at the end of their lives. And then, being left with that image really messed me up. So I guess, the only thing that I'm thankful for with that whole experience is that my chemotherapy cycles they were quite short as far as duration on the chemo ward. So I'd go in and I'd be attached to chemotherapy medication for roughly 15 to 20 minutes. So during that time, I'd have my headphones on, keep my eyes closed, because I didn't want to engage or make eye contact with anybody, because I just saw myself in their eyes. So I'd sit there with my music on, eyes closed, and then I'd be tapped when my bag was empty, and I'd leave that ward as quick as I could physically move. So my chemotherapy was made up of going into hospital, having an infusion, and then I would have 10 days worth of chemotherapy pills to take at home. So we would drive from Southend to London. So we go, first round of chemo starts, and I feel okay exiting the hospital. And it wasn't until we hit the M25 to make our way home to Southend when I was hit with uncontrollable urge to throw up. So we hit the M25, and for quite a way there's no hard shoulder. So it gets to a point where I just can't keep it in. So I have to ask my partner to please, can you pull over at the nearest opportunity, because I'm going to throw up. So we find a hard shoulder that we pulled into, and I literally opened that door as quick as I could, and I was just there heaving and heaving and heaving. And at the end of it, I felt like everything that I ever had put into my body just came out. And I was literally left there in the passenger seat, just completely drained. Head was spinning, unable to really communicate. We finally arrive home, and the next port call is I get out of my clothes and I just hit the bed, and I fall asleep, fall into a deep sleep. And then the following 10 days, I'm literally in that state for the whole time, taking these chemotherapy drugs at home. So following those 10 days, I would get 32 days for my body to recover before I start my next cycle. So it was, 32 days following the 10 days of medication I take at home. So when it came back round to me going back in to have my next round of chemo, I have to have bloods done prior. Thankfully, my bloods were done locally in Southend. So I go have my bloods done at Southend University Hospital, and I'm told that my neutrophil count is too low for me to start my next round of chemo. So now I'm asking, so what does that mean? They said, we have to delay your chemo until your neutrophil counts raise. So I get sent home. I go in the following week. Again, it's the same thing. Neutrophil count is still too low. So thankfully, on the third week I go in, they say, okay, your blood count looks fine. We're going to make your next appointment for chemo, again, which is in Charing Cross Hospital, London. So now we have the same task of driving to London, being in the same environment, going through infusion, making our way back home, getting home and having no energy to do anything other than sleep. So this continues, 10-day cycle at home. Again, not able to interact, not able to have conversations, meaningful conversations. You know, I'm lying in the bedroom, staring at the ceiling and just looking at my life and how my life's going to pan out from this point onwards. So, you know, I'm experiencing these mental health issues. Don't have answers. I'm on this one-way track where I'm being told what to do and I don't have a say in the matter. So now I'm losing my confidence. I'm losing my ability to stand up for myself. And then another 32 days go by, and then we go through that same rigmarole again. I'm having bloods done. Blood count's too low. Another week comes, another week goes. I'm back in hospital having bloods done. Your blood count's too low. So time is now passing. And so what's slowly happening is my treatment cycle is now becoming more and more delayed. So I'm supposed to start my third round of chemo on the 7th of February 2021. And I go to hospital and they say, Mr. Martin, too much time has passed for us to put you or for us to give you your next cycle. So what we've agreed to do is to stop your chemo and we're going to monitor you going forward. So so then now monitoring begins. So my monitoring was initially supposed to be every 6 months. So I then told them that, you know, I'm not too happy about that length of time passing before I'm told where I am. So they then suggest, okay, look, we're gonna perform our scans every 3 months. So up until, we're in November now, up until my last scan, which was in August, I had been going into hospital every 3 months to have a brain scan to see where things are. So I would say for the last 2 years, I've been told I'm in a stable condition. But there was something that wasn't sitting right with me. So since my chemo stopped in 2021, I've been plagued with these debilitating headaches. And they always start in the same place and they always stay in the same place. So behind my right eye, I'd get a sensation of something being tightened and then continually being tightened. And then it gets to a point where I can't open my right eye. So I would have to shut my right eye in an effort to help reduce the pain. reduce the intensity of the pain. So I'd report back to my oncology team and let them know, look, I'm still having these really bad headaches. Is there anything you can do to, help me deal with the pain? So they give me pills for pain management, which do jack. So I'm left in pain in between these scans. They then refer me to a migraine specialist. I go see the specialist and he again confirms that these are not migraines, what you're having. There's something else going on there. So once all this information is passed on to the oncology team, that's when they suggest, okay, look, we're going to need to see you more regularly. So regularly was every 3 months, which I said, okay, cool. I'd rather it be every 3 months than 6. So, since 2021, I've been in and out of hospital, having these scans done, and being told that, things are looking good. You're in a stable condition still. Just continue doing what you're doing, because what you're doing seems to be keeping the regrowth of these cancerous cells at bay. So because I'm being given all of this information, I'm eager to get control of my life again. So I convinced myself, all right, Mike, you're out of the woods now. Let's get our life back on. Let's get your life back on track. It wasn't until, I guess, a few weeks of having told myself this that I started to realize that I'm now becoming more and more withdrawn from my relationship, because I'm questioning everything. I'm questioning every sensation I'm having. Shit, does this pain mean the tumor's coming back? Now, I don't get to speak to anybody for 90 days. So for 90 days, I'm stuck in my head as far as my condition. So I'm going to bed with headaches. I'm waking up with headaches. I'm taking these pills which are doing nothing at all. So now I'm literally living a set of 90 days in fear because I don't know what's going on, why this is happening, which is now making me withdraw and internalizing a number of different possible scenarios. So what happens if what happens if the cancer comes back? What happens if these cells start to grow? And I'm literally in a place where I'm unable to really express myself openly. I'm unable to show my appreciation to my partner. I feel like my life is on pause and I'm just waiting to revisit the hospital, speak to the oncology team, and to be reassured that things are okay. But at the same time, because of where I am mentally, my relationship is suffering. And I'm unaware of the impact that my condition is having on my relationship with my partner. So my current state of mind at the time is I feel like I'm in survival mode. And, whatever energy that I have, I need that energy to make sure that I'm able to function. And all of that, is having a tremendous impact on how I'm communicating within my relationship. I'm very, very much detached because I'm caught up in my own thoughts. I'm not a very nice person to be around. I'm not a happy person to be around. And it was something that wasn't in my control. I just couldn't control it at the time because it's a huge load to have to contemplate daily your survival. And I don't think many people really can understand that impact on a person who's always been relatively active, relatively fit their entire life. Don't smoke, don't drink on a regular basis. All of it was just surreal and a huge shock. So I'm struggling to be the partner I need to be, and I'm also struggling to be strong for myself. So, things are not going that well within our relationship. I then attempt to return to work, which was a major struggle because living in Southend, I was limited to what I could do. And at the time, being a freelance personal trainer, I was left with the feeling that, and at the time, it made perfect sense to me to make this decision. So, with having experienced COVID, I felt that if I'm going to go back into the industry that, I've been working in for a number of years, I need to create an environment where I determine if I work or not anybody else. And taking social distancing into consideration as well, I felt it would be better for me to set up my own studio and earn a living that way. So in 2021, I created Muscle in Motion Fitness. I found a space in an area which isn't too far from where I was successful as a PT. So I went about setting up a studio. I'd like to say again, things are not 100% clear because it was a very, very traumatic period in my life. I'd like to say by March, I was up and running as a small business, but still living in Southend. Now, with all businesses, they say it's highly unlikely you're going to make a profit within the first 3 to 5 years. So, I set about creating, advertising, speaking to ex-clients, letting them know that, hey, I'm back in London. I'm in a position now where I can continue delivering my service. So initially, things were very, very slow. So not making a profit, literally only making enough to keep studio doors open. So, my commute was 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, while still recovering from chemo, which was taxing. So I'd set out as early as 6 a.m. to get into London for an 8 o'clock or an 8:30 start time. And I wouldn't leave London until my last client, which more than not was as late as 8:30 in the evening. So I'd be in London that whole time with the hope of training clients for the best part of that day. But by the time I'd get home in the evening, I wouldn't have eaten just because my mind was focused on, I've got to make this business work, I've got to make this business work, which was an extra stress on top of everything else that was going on. So, I'd get home close to 10 o'clock in the evening, and that doesn't really leave much time for you to have, a positive relationship. So it'd be a case of I'd get home, zero energy in the tank, not much to really say about the day. I'd eat, get ready for bed, and I'd hit the bed. And then it would just start all over again the next day. And I was living my life like that for the best part of 2021 and 2022. And I feel everything just caught up with me, more so in 2023, because we decided to move back into London, which would offer me more opportunity to engage with new clients, new customers. It would allow me to be close to the studio where I could continue creating a better space to deliver personal training from. And in addition to that, it would have taken a lot of the stress off of traveling. So, as best as I could, I was trying to support our living conditions in London. I was trying my best to provide financially, which was really, really difficult because coming out of COVID, not many people had that disposable income where they could afford to have a personal trainer. So, it was just a mess. It was just a big mess. Trying to earn a living, trying to be the man that I needed to be, not only for myself, but for my boys, my kids. Trying to be the man that my partner needed me to be. Everything was just so difficult. Everything was just so confusing to manage. And ultimately, my relationship ended quite abruptly. I guess I wasn't able to see the signs, because when you're caught up in something that bigger and beyond yourself, you begin to become confused. You begin to feel like you're drowning amongst the confusion. And for anybody, if you're drowning, your main goal is to attempt to keep your head above the water, which is what I felt I was doing. I was struggling to keep my head above the water, and certain aspects of who I was had to disappear, and I had to become this other person who was taking on the persona or the persona of a survivor. So I was literally just trying my best to survive amongst everything that was going on, and ultimately that was the one of the main reasons why my relationship failed, in my personal opinion. And yeah, this next phase of this journey begins, where I'm now attempting to recreate the identity that I felt I lost, which meant, moving home, finding somewhere new to live, figuring things out. So ultimately, the beginning of 2024 was when I made a huge decision to shut down the business, which was really difficult for me, because that was literally the one and only thing that I still had left remaining that gave me some sort of an identity. And so when I shut down the business, I was further impacted with mental health issues, and I was left with no choice but to seek out some support, some help. And it's been that way ever since. I'm still on this journey. I now see the oncology team every 4 months. I'm still living with these headaches that sidelined me. I've yet to build up the confidence to return to the industry that, I've loved and I've worked in for well over 20 years. I've worked within the fitness industry alongside playing professionally for over 20 years. And I'm still struggling to return to that industry because I no longer look like I used to look. Not being a big head, I feel I was an advertising tool for my profession. And now I don't feel the same way about myself, about my image. So I'm working through it, and it's taking time, and I believe it's going to take quite a while before I can look in the mirror and feel like, yeah, that's the guy that I recognize and not the person that I see in the mirror now. Having had basketball as a safe place has really helped me slowly to rebuild my confidence as a person, as a man, as a basketball player. So I'm slowly beginning to find some sort of happiness in my life through playing basketball, through remaining active in my community. I still coach kids on a Saturday at the basketball club that I formed back in 2006. So we're still growing strong. We are growing in numbers, which is a positive thing. And I'm really, really passionate about, giving back through the sport because it's taught me so much, provided me with so many opportunities and opportunities that I don't feel I would ever have been exposed to if it wasn't for basketball. The passion and the love for the sport still remains, and it is a very, very big part of my life. As well as attempting to, beat this disease that I'm living with. Attempting to just live a purposeful life. So that's where things are currently.
So let's talk about, I guess, looking forwards. And I think, I was very fortunate to interview somebody else back in, I think it was about season 5, a guy called Ashton, and he went through not the same cancer journey, but the cancer journey of being a very outgoing, athletic young man. He went through it very early on. I think he was 25 when he was going through it, but went through it during the pandemic. And again, had that real identity piece off the back of it of who am I? He looked after himself. He was fit and healthy. And that was part of why I think he got through it. But I think equally, you come out of the back of an experience like that and it does make you reassess things. And that's assuming that everything else in your life is stable and not changing around you. And obviously with the experiences you shared there, there's a huge amount of change going on. And I think we talk about kind of an optimistic future for athletes that, if we sidestep some of the stuff that you've been through, just the stepping out of the full-time athlete role on its own is a big enough challenge, forgetting all of the other things that you've had thrown into your journey. So when you look forward, if we talk optimistically about what lies ahead, how do you see the next kind of maybe 6 months to a year in terms of ambitions and things that you are working positively towards?
So this experience for me has it's identified a few things as far as resilience. It highlighted that despite how tough things are, there's always hope. And I think my life has been, since my diagnosis, it's been a journey of hope. It's been a journey of belief. It's been a journey of strength building. I mentioned resilience earlier on. And, my view of the future, and you've mentioned the next six months. Recently I was fortunate enough to be offered an opportunity to experience something completely different to my normal day to day. And that opportunity was to travel to Nepal and participate in a Mount Everest base camp trip, which in the initial mention of it was daunting, but at the same time it was really, really intriguing. And having come so close to losing my life, I was continually umming and ahhing about it. Should I, shouldn't I, should I, shouldn't I? And I'll let it be known, I fear flying. I'm not comfortable in the air. As much as I used to jump and dunk and whatnot, I've never been comfortable in the air, and particularly in an aeroplane. It just doesn't sit well with me to be up that high away from the land in a mode of transport that literally looks impossible to leave the ground. But anyway, that's just my analysis of the whole flying thing. So this opportunity was presented to me through somebody who I initially used to bang heads with. Got this big goofy smile on my face because this guy he'd helped mentor me in more ways than he actually understands or realizes. His name's Bob Barnier. And I've known Bob for my entire basketball career. My first introduction to Bob was I attempted to play basketball amateur level for a team called Heston Airborne, and they were based out in Osterley. So this is when I was 20. So that's when I actually started playing basketball. So that's 20. I was very athletic. I was very hard-headed. I was a very ignorant young man. And I can say that honestly, being the person that I am today. So despite not really understanding nor appreciating the rules of the sport, played my first ever game with Heston Airborne, and Bob was one of the referees. So being a young man with not much discipline, being a young man who, and I still do, I speak from here. I had a certain level of disrespect in me at that particular time. So, Bob was officiating the game, and I was attempting to have an impact on the game, to benefit my team. And he'd make a couple of calls. I'd get called for fouls. And, as any player in the heat of the moment, you're adamant you didn't foul anybody. You didn't break any of the rules. So, I'd literally give him the sort of attitude I'd give somebody on the street. And he'd put me in my place with a quickness. And having grown up in a single parent household with no father figure, it was really difficult for me to accept an older person speaking to me in the way that they were speaking to me. But again, within the confines of the sport, I had to be very careful with how I would respond, because ultimately the last thing I want to do is get kicked out of the game and sit on the bench. So, my relationship with Bob was a case of having to really bite my tongue on a number of occasions. And while doing that, I slowly began to realize he's actually not being disrespectful. He's actually being very, very respectful based on his role in that particular environment. So as I became more experienced in playing, we sort of like created this love-hate relationship. Love to see him before a game. Hated to hear him call fouls on me. But ultimately, at the end of the game, we'd shake hands and we'd part ways. So through playing at the amateur level, I was introduced to Bob. And then, fortunately enough, I then had the opportunity to play professionally. Lo and behold, who's also refereeing at a professional level is Bob. So, we'd see each other, we'd have brief conversations and stuff. And our exchanges became a lot more respectful. I learned a lot from him as far as what referees would be looking for in a game. And Bob was always that kind of person who'd have a conversation with you, whereas other referees, and I can say this now, with no issue, a lot of other referees in the BBL, arrogant. They approach the game like the fans are coming to watch them. And that's not what the sport's about. The fans have come to watch the players who are representing that club play the game with the intention of winning. And some of the disrespectful things that, I experienced, the way in which a referee would establish their respect on the floor, I had no time for, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all deserve a level of respect. We all deserve an opportunity to express our disagreement with something that happened on the floor. And a lot of referees would never give you that opportunity, whereas Bob would allow you to have your rant, but then he'd come over to you later on in the game and explain why that particular call was made, which then would have you reflect and think, actually, I was in the wrong. And that's where he earned my respect immediately. So, we've had this relationship, this relationship, which is now a friendship, growing over the years. So after Bob had heard about my diagnosis and, how my life had been impacted by it all, he had always said to me, prior to me retiring, I'm going to do something for you. And he'd say that, and he'd leave that thought with me, and he'd turn his back and he'd walk off. And I'd always be like, what's Bob talking about? I'm going to do something for you. And he'd walk off, and he'd leave me there on the spot, just stunned and confused as to what the hell that means. So after I had found out through social media that he had started doing the Mount Everest treks, I'd always send him a message, mate, that's amazing. I'm left in awe at these images you shared with people on social media. Because the scenery, the landscape was just unbelievable. And to see somebody that I knew being there and experiencing that was something that I was always kind of like, I wonder what that feels like. Because it just looks like something that I would never ever get the opportunity to do in my lifetime. So, having made contact with him again through social media, we would talk a bit more frequently again through messages and whatnot. And again, that same line would be mentioned about, I'm going to do something for you. So at this point now, we had already exchanged numbers and whatnot. I then receive a call. I then receive a message early one morning, And the message read, can you be available from the 3rd of October to the 19th of October? And that was it. Again, leaving me thinking, what's he on about? So a couple of weeks go by, and then we actually have a proper catch up. And then he says, look, taking a group of people out to Nepal, and we're going to do Mount Everest base camp. Are you down? And I was scared to say yes, but I was also scared to say no, because having gone through what I've gone through, you know, I can say it, I was at the lowest point of my life, single, and I'm man enough to admit this, heartbroken, still heartbroken to this day, because the person that I was blessed to be with is somebody that had a huge impact on my life, especially during the most traumatic period of my life. You know, she was selfless in what she did for me. She prioritized me, us, during a time where we didn't know if I was going to make it. You know, I was also in a position where I was financially strapped, not able to work, because having these headaches as frequently as I was having them, I lacked the ability to be consistent. So as much as I would wake up in the morning and convince myself, Mike, today's going to be a good day. You're going to go out there and you're going to attempt to recreate your identity within this setting that you made a name for yourself in. Literally, by the time I'd showered, had something to eat, and got myself dressed, the emotions took over, which triggered the headache. And I'd be left sitting, not having the confidence to leave the room I was living in at the time. So having gone through all of that, and now being given an opportunity where I would be around somebody whom I respected and I trusted, and to also embark on a journey that I would never have dreamt would occur in my lifetime, I said to Bob, yes, I'm interested in doing this trek. So, the months and the weeks leading up to the trek, I attempted to mentally prepare for something that I had yet to experience. I would physically attempt to prepare for an environment that I had never experienced. And while still dealing with mental health issues, and some physical limitations, I'd lose my way. And I'd consider calling him and saying, look, Bob, I think it's too much for me to manage right now. I think I'm going to have to take a step away from the thing that I've committed to. But during those times, you experience, a few highs. And whenever I experience those highs, I'd say to myself, what are you playing at? You're going to go and do this thing because Bob said it's going to help. And being in a different environment and also a new environment. So, as the time goes by, slowly getting more and more excited about it. And then Bob also mentions that, is there a particular charity that you would like to attempt to raise funds for? So at the time, because of what I'd gone through and, the experiences I had, the first charity that came into mind was brain cancer, the Brain Cancer Trust. But then at the same time, I was thinking, and, I may get sort of stick for saying this, but I can only be my most authentic self by speaking my truth. Because of how deeply I'm committed to the kids in my community, I thought, would you not have more of an impact by giving back to the community you came from? And my way of engaging with the community was through basketball. So I asked him, would it be okay if I attempted to raise money for a basketball program? Because since we've been running the program, we've been coaching voluntarily since 2006, which is, so we are now the longest running basketball program within the borough of Brent, London Borough of Brent. And we are not being funded, and we are not being paid. And our intention, when I say our, despite me having created the club off the back end of coming home with a bronze medal from Commonwealth Games, I've always had a really good group of people around me who knew me before I was able to play the sport of basketball, and who also had a passion for playing basketball. So I met these people through basketball prior to me playing for any club. And it's like the same situation for many young people who engage in sport. You build and make lifelong friends through sport because you're all passionate about the same thing. So, as the years have gone by, they've supported me in the background when I've gone on to do big things. They've always kept in contact with me, and they're family. So those people who I call family are the people who I'm still running this basketball club with. And they give up their Saturdays just as often as I give up my Saturdays to give back to these kids in the effort to provide them with an alternative to what they are experiencing outside of school and outside of the sport pool. Because I'm sure, there's a number of people, well, everybody understands the challenges that are out there for our young people, being led down dark paths, being attracted to the glitz, being attracted to, the glamorous lifestyle. Everything's money, money, money orientated. And unfortunately, a lot of our children these days are quite naive and don't really know what the right decision is to make. So by providing a safe place through basketball, I thought it was more important that I raise funds for these kids. So at least I'm creating an opportunity for me to continually engage with them and to provide them with an opportunity through the sport. So that was my decision as far as what cause I would attempt to raise funds for. And currently we've managed to raise £1,800 odd, which I feel is amazing. And that's where my focus is at the moment, because, as much as I've been talking, I know you mentioned what's the future looking like for the next 6 months. So, my plan is to continue to become more involved with the basketball program that I'm trying to create. I'm trying to have an impact in my community, a positive impact in my community through the sport of basketball, because it's given me so much. It's made me the person that I am today. It's forced me, I won't say forced, it's allowed me to see that there's more out there than your postcode. There's more opportunities out there than remaining in this small goldfish bowl. When there's a huge ocean out there, there's a huge ocean of opportunity. And I wouldn't have known that if it wasn't for basketball. I mean, I hadn't left London, quite embarrassing to say. I hadn't left London until I started playing basketball. Everything I did, all of the activities I took part in as a young man were all within the M25. And it wasn't until I began playing this sport and falling in love with this sport did I become aware that there is life outside of this city. And for me, that was such an eye-opener that once I experienced that, I wanted to go everywhere and anywhere to play basketball. So I want to give or provide that same opportunity for the kids that are in this borough. That's what, the next 6 months looks like for me. In addition to, that work that I'm doing and hoping to continue doing. Through my experience, I've also become more and more intrigued with managing mental health. So that's another area that I'm very, very much interested in. And I'm wanting to create more of an awareness surrounding, number one, men's mental health, and also mental health within athletes, particularly basketball players, particularly in the UK, because I feel that when you're active within sport, and I mean this especially in the UK, everybody's quite aware of your presence and quite aware of the activities that you're passionate about participating in. And I found that when you retire and leave the sport, unless you know those who have created a very obvious identity within the sport, attached to the sport, players like myself, I'm not going to say discarded, but are quickly forgotten about. Now, from my personal standpoint, I played for just over 20 years here and abroad, which I had a very short stint abroad. For over 20 years in front of English fans, playing for English clubs, achieving a fair amount for English club, and also create an identity for myself within the sport. To be left with a sensation of being forgotten about when you gave the sport so much of your time, time away from family, time away from friends. You're going to be impacted by not being within that circle as often as you used to be. And I know for myself, if it wasn't for coaching, which wasn't created by anybody else, it was created by myself, I'm not too sure where I would be as far as an ex-basketball player, an ex-England international player. I'm not too sure where I'd be. So I feel there needs to come a time, and I'm hoping to spearhead it, where we can interact with those players who impacted the sport at the level that they did, and also being English. I think that's hugely important, and I think it's an area that's overlooked. Whereas in comparison to, what we use, the NBA or college basketball as an example, we have jerseys that are retired. I experienced a retirement game, which was amazing, which was emotional. And that was with Guildford Heat, where, we achieved a number of successes as a club. And sadly, that club is not, again, it's laughable. Again, sadly, that club is no longer alive. And to know that, all of the things that we achieved as players, as a franchise, you can't even find online. You can't even find anything about Guildford Heat online. But there was a phase within British basketball history where we were classed as the top team in the league. And I find it very, very disheartening that there is no trace of that club and that period in time on the internet. So I honestly do feel that there needs to be platform and the level of awareness as to that transition from being involved in the sport at its highest level in this country, and then having to deal with retirement as to what now? Where do I go now? How do I survive after giving this sport so many years of my life? What's the next 6 months going to be like for me after I hang them up? Fortunate for me, I still love playing, and I played even after I left Guildford Heat. Played at London Lions for 2 seasons, and then following that, I did some coaching, and I guess that was my exit from the game. And I've spoken to ex-players over the years, just touching base with them and finding out how they're doing and how they're coping, how they're managing, what their lives look like now. And we all say the same things. Man, I miss those years. Man, I miss that experience. And I just think that there's a space in the market for these stories to be shared, and that's something else that I'm hoping to embark on in the next couple of months, just to potentially help increase the awareness about UK basketball at the highest level. Our opinions as players, and also our suggestions as to what we can do to help create a smoother pathway for those who are playing at the professional level now in the UK, and potentially equipping them with alternatives to life after basketball, whether it be an opportunity to study, whether it be an opportunity to, achieve a degree in a particular area of their interest. if they're still passionate about the sport, are they interested in going into coaching? Are we creating those pathways for our athletes? We're not. If it wasn't for our passion and love for this sport, there wouldn't be the sport at the level that it's at in the UK.
I think that's a really key point, Mike, because again, we speak to lots of different people from different sports, not just on this podcast, but in my professional life. And I think sport is built on a lot of goodwill.
Yeah.
But I think there's especially in, I guess, if we take football out of the equation, there's a lack of understanding of the, let's say, the personal cost to being involved in semi-professional and professional sport versus the return whilst you're doing it. The ongoing remuneration, if you like, but also the what comes next. And been, I guess, fortunate enough to have a lot of great conversations with people like yourself about the understanding that there is a need for something to change. And I think a lot of sports are in that place of going, we know something needs to change. What does the next step look like? And I think, with the stories that you've shared today and the insights, and the deeply personal stuff you've shared, which I'm really grateful for, the understanding that it isn't just somebody on a roster, it's somebody's life. And, often when you give a huge amount of your life to something, and it's not saying we're doing this for money. What's this actually saying is like, there should be a mutual respect that actually, if you give a huge amount to something over time, it would be hoped that those people are looked after and supported in whatever comes next. That might be in sport, that might be in something else. And I think there's some really good stories and people we can certainly link up off the back of this conversation. But I guess to try and pull it all together, and I know we've covered a very big range of stuff. Is there maybe one leaving message that you'd like to share with our listeners and viewers to kind of pull everything together today?
Again, I'll just conclude everything that I've shared with you today. I think it's, in a word, I think it's hope that there will be challenging times where you think you won't be able to get through it, get over it, get past it. I think if we live with a level of hope, there's always a possibility that things will come good. I've yet to get to that place myself, but I do live each day with a level of hope that I hope today's going to be better than it was yesterday. I hope my mentality, my mental health is going to improve from what it was yesterday, today. I think if we live with hope, you're always going to allow an opportunity for you to overcome, be successful, and ultimately find your happiness.
Well, what a perfect way to pull it all together. And I say there's probably a few things that we'll follow up on in the show notes for people that want to connect with you and probably continue this conversation in some way. But on behalf of everyone who's watched and listened there, just a huge thank you, because the range of experiences that you've had over both your professional journey but also your personal journey, I'm sure there's people out there going that they can empathize with some of the challenges that you've had, but also if they are still going through those things themselves, can take strength. And what you said there to kind of pull it together around hope is something that I think is lacking in the world today. So just a huge thank you, Mike, for your time. It's been an absolute joy of sharing this conversation with you.
I appreciate your time and I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, we're all human. We're all going through different things. And, a word that resonates with me is transparency. I think the more we're able to be transparent, the happier our lives will be.
In 110 shows, I'm not sure we've ever had someone be so open and honest through our interview. Again, a huge thank you to Mike there for sharing his journey with us. You can check out Mike's fundraising page following his Everest hike, as well as connect with Mike on his socials via the links in the show notes. Don't forget to hit subscribe however you're joining us today, and we look forward to sharing our next conversation with you very soon on the Rogue Monkey podcast.